Apple promised intelligence. Google delivered it. Siri was left behind.
For years, Siri was the symbol of the future. Apple introduced her slowly, carefully. A digital assistant that was supposed to understand you, not commands, you, but something went wrong. While the world moved forward, Siri stayed where she was. She didn't get smarter. She didn't evolve. She simply stopped. At the same time, artificial intelligence changed completely. Models stopped following instructions and started understanding meaning, context, intent, reasoning. And that's when the difference became impossible to ignore. This was no longer about features or updates. It was about intelligence itself. And Siri was no longer part of the conversation. This is how Apple fell behind in AI and how Gemini made it obvious.
The problem with Siri was never her voice. It was her brain. Siri was built in a different era, an era where assistants followed rules. If you said the right words, you got the right answer. If you didn't, nothing happened. This system worked when the world was simple, but intelligence doesn't work like that anymore. Modern AI doesn't wait for perfect commands. It understands intention, context, meaning. And while Apple tried to protect Siri inside a closed system, Google did the opposite. They let Gemini learn from everything. Not just what users said, but what they meant. That decision changed everything. This wasn't an upgrade. It was a rebuild.
To understand why Gemini feels smarter, you have to stop thinking about assistants and start thinking about thinking itself. When you ask Siri a question, she doesn't really think. She searches, she looks for patterns, and then she guesses what you want. That's why the experience often feels random. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, and sometimes it completely misses the point. Gemini works differently. It doesn't wait for perfect wording. It listens to intent. It looks at context. And then it builds an answer, step by step, not based on keywords, but on meaning. This is why the difference feels immediate. You don't feel like you're talking to software. You feel like you're talking to something that understands the situation. Ask Siri to summarize a long article, and she often gives you fragments, headlines, disconnected points. Ask Gemini the same thing, and it explains the story, the logic, the consequences. Ask Siri to help plan a complex task, like a trip, a project, or even a difficult conversation, and she quickly reaches her limit. Ask Gemini, and it asks questions back. It adjusts, it refines, it remembers what you said 5 steps ago. That's not a feature difference, that's a cognitive difference. Siri was designed to respond, Gemini was designed to reason, and once users experienced that, there was no going back, because intelligence is addictive. Not in a flashy way, but in a quiet one. You stop repeating yourself, you stop correcting the system, you stop lowering your expectations, and that's where Apple's real problem begins, because Apple doesn't just sell technology. Apple sells confidence. The feeling that things just work. When Siri fails, it doesn't feel like a bug, it feels like betrayal, especially when users know something better already exists. Gemini didn't beat Siri by being louder, or faster, or more entertaining. It won by being calmer, smarter, and more patient. And once that contrast is seen, it can't be unseen. This is the moment when comparison turns into judgment, and judgment turns into migration. This is why Siri isn't just losing relevance, she's losing trust.
When the difference became obvious, Apple didn't respond. Not publicly. No statements, no explanations, no urgency. Because Apple doesn't react the way others do. It waits, it observes, it assumes silence will protect the brand. But silence has a cost. Inside Apple, something shifted. Engineers began asking questions that had been avoided. Why does Siri feel limited? Why can't she follow reasoning chains? Why does she break the moment things get complex? The uncomfortable truth was impossible to ignore. Siri wasn't just behind. She was locked inside decisions made years ago. Decisions built around control, privacy, predictability. Apple believed intelligence should never surprise the user. But modern AI is built on surprise, on emergence, on outcomes no one fully controls. That's what makes it powerful, and that's exactly what makes Apple uncomfortable. While Gemini was allowed to explore language freely, Siri was restricted. While Gemini learned from massive patterns, Siri waited for approval, review, policy, legal clearance. Each delay widened the gap. Users noticed something subtle. Gemini felt curious. Siri felt cautious. Gemini asked, "What else?" Siri asked, "What command?" And that difference changes how trust works. Trust isn't built by avoiding mistakes. It's built by handling complexity. When people feel they must simplify themselves for technology, trust disappears. Apple now faces a choice it can't design away. Move faster and risk losing control. Move slower and risk becoming irrelevant. This isn't a feature race. It's a philosophy conflict. And for the first time, Apple's philosophy is being challenged publicly. Not by critics, but by comparison.
The problem with Siri was never her voice. It was her brain. Siri was built in a different era, an era where assistants followed rules. If you said the right words, you got the right answer. If you didn't, nothing happened. This system worked when the world was simple, but intelligence doesn't work like that anymore. Modern AI doesn't wait for perfect commands. It understands intention, context, meaning. And while Apple tried to protect Siri inside a closed system, Google did the opposite. They let Gemini learn from everything. Not just what users said, but what they meant. That decision changed everything. This wasn't an upgrade. It was a rebuild.